Brunsy, we got a chance to talk to Coach Bolt
Tuesday?
yeah, 2 days ago. And it was interesting because right after that, they kind of released the rotation, and it was a pretty sweet graphic. And one thing that caught my eye right away is they've got some balance that maybe some other teams don't have to be able to go not only righty lefty, but with the mix of power and finesse too. Like that's not a good group to start with when Brockett's at the back end of your rotation.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting too because they, especially later in the weekend. I mean, you've got Walsh, who the velocity is up, but I mean, he's still going to be stretched to probably touch 90 with any kind of regularity. Brockett throws harder, I think, than he probably gets credit for. But I mean, there's a realistic chance that you could have, like a Carson Yassa coming in behind Will Walsh. So you've got Walsh that's kind of not a soft throwing lefty. It may be a little crafty. And then you've got a guy that's potentially a guy that's 6'7", 235 with a mid-90s fastball coming in behind him. So you can kind of mix and match that way as well, where you kind of get settled in against the guy, and then you're giving them a completely different look. And they've got a few of those guys in the bullpen this year that just throw hard. And I think that's something that they didn't maybe have as much last year. And so they've got a good mix of guys. I mean, I always hesitate to say too much about how great pitching depth is, because it's better chance than not that it's going to look completely different in about 3 weeks. But on paper right now, I mean, they've got a pretty good mix of arms. It seems like they've got more depth, and I don't think you schedule the way that Nebraska has this year if you don't have the pitching to be able to hang in for a 3-game series or a 3-game weekend, with some of these opponents that Nebraska's going to be facing. I mean, I just, that's not a good recipe for success. So I think that reflects a little bit of confidence over there that they've got enough high quality arms to be pretty effective.
So I'm glad you brought up the schedule, Bruntz, because DB and I were talking about this yesterday, where obviously you don't really get a ramp-up period with this Nebraska team. You kind of hit the ground running in Arizona, and it's like that for a lot of teams that don't play in great baseball conferences where they really have to load up on the non-con. Like, how would you feel if you were Will Bolt about being able to get your guys ready basically from the jump, especially in a cold weather state, as opposed to some of these other teams that sort of use the first few weeks almost as an extended spring training?
Yeah, I mean, he's in control of the schedule. So, the thing that's a little bit that you kind of have to do, I mean, if you're having conversations about hosting and, being a team that's, set up for an at-large type bid, you have to schedule aggressively and you have to win some of those games. It's the schedule's even tougher this year, though. I mean, the Big Ten with the travel and everything, I haven't really dug into this to see if it's kind of across the conference, but it's, the conference kind of took advantage of Nebraska's spring break. Mm-hmm. And you basically have like a true 2-week West Coast swing that they're making in the middle of March. So
the one that starts with UCLA?
Yes.
Yeah, because it's UCLA, Pepperdine, and who's that? Oh, SC, right after that.
Yeah. So you're basically on the road from, the previous Thursday to the following Monday morning, and then you come back and you got a midweek at K-State. And then, oh, by the way, you've got Oregon State coming in for 3 games at the end of that stretch too. It's a really tough schedule, and it's going to be a challenge. I don't think that you would probably have set it up the way that Nebraska did if you didn't have a veteran team coming back. I think that's a big consideration for the way that they did things. And I don't know. I mean, I think when you do have a veteran team that's kind of been through it a little bit more, I think that, when you start in January, guys have a little bit more understanding of how you have to ramp up and kind of what it takes to be clicking at the start of the season. It's obviously tough being a team in the North, but they were able to get outside for about a week or so with that new turf practice field they've got. And, we'll see how it goes. But I do think, with the way that this team is and as veteran of a team as it is, I think you can kind of expect a little bit more competitive baseball right out of the gates than maybe you would otherwise.
It's interesting, Brunsy, because we were talking about, I think it was last week with you, maybe even the week before last, like how patient we'll be without jumping to conclusions, because inevitably, like, the season will play out and Nebraska will probably be pretty okay, but we'll hand wring a little bit about midweek games, right? They've got Omaha and I think SDSU and I think Wichita State's in there as a midweeker in February, in March. It's not as easy as the low-hanging fruit of, well, they just don't care about midweek games, because clearly they do. The other low-hanging fruit answer is it's depth in pitching for midweek games.
Yeah.
What is it for you?
On the midweek stuff?
Yeah.
It's I think part of it is, it's two things, I think. I think part of it is pitching depth. I don't think they've had – I think when you don't have your Sunday spot solidified, and that's kind of been one that's bounced around a little bit for them the last couple of years.
Yep.
When you don't have that kind of nailed down, that kind of bleeds into the midweeks too, because you kind of have to start tinkering a little bit. And you're like, okay, who's our guy on Sunday? Who's our midweek guy? And I think they've got a bigger pool of potential starters this year, which helps the midweek stuff. I think it also helps when you have guys in the bullpen who you feel a little bit more comfortable being able to go in and pitch multiple innings. And I think sometimes, over the last couple of years, if you have to kind of bucket brigade it a little bit on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, it's been a little bit more difficult to do that because you haven't had just multi-inning guys in the bullpen. It's been a lot of, one inning and just kind of hope that you can keep passing it down the line. So I think that's a piece of it. And the other thing about it is too, Nebraska had a decent lineup last year. The offense, was really clicking by the end of the year. But sometimes in those midweeks, you just need to go out and just win the game with your offense. And they also didn't do that enough the past couple of years on those midweeks. It's a lot of, 4-3 games, 5-2, stuff like that, where they're really tight. And, if you can get a little bit more out of your offense in those situations, you don't have to be quite as fine with what you're doing on the mound on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And it's going to be, you mentioned some of the midweeks that they're facing or that they've scheduled. That it's the first week they've got Omaha and South Dakota State. And then beyond that, it's like Wichita State and then a bunch of Big 12 teams. Like there's not much, there's not much, in that schedule where you just kind of are able to take a deep breath against a team that you should probably run over.
We're talking with Michael Bruntz, Husker247. All right, Bruntz, I'm going to ask you kind of a strange question here, so stick with me. Which do you think would lead more directly to wins for their respective teams? If Nebraska baseball had just lights out weekend starters, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm giving you all three, or Nebraska football had a dominant 4-man pass rush on the defensive line? I know it's super like an apple to oranges, but I'm curious. We've been talking about the 4-man rush for like all week.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think a dominant 4-man pass rush probably looks a little bit different from what they've had consistently. I mean, I think they were somewhat good. Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker kind of make that picture look a little bit better. But I think if I would give more of that to the football team. I mean, baseball wise, they've actually had decent weekend pitching those past couple of years.
That would be my
So, Bruntz,
counselor, let me start with
the reason I ask is so I started with the question to Mitch yesterday whether or not being able to consistently get pressure with 4 is the most valuable thing in football. And what I wanted to ask was if it was the most valuable thing across sports. If there was one single thing that got you more wins than being able to consistently get pressure with 4. And so we talked about, okay, what about elite 3-point shooting in basketball? Or I said,
goaltender.
yeah, a goalie on a heater in hockey. And then as we're talking now, I'm thinking, okay, what about like a really good frontline starting rotation? And so I'm trying to figure out, because I can't really come up with a thing that I think is more valuable than four-man rush and a consistent four-man rush in football.
Yeah. I don't know. Does dominant quarterback play get you?
So that was Mitch's answer. That was Mitch's answer.
That was Mitch's answer.
Okay.
I still would take
D-line. Of your scenario, I think for the four-man rush, I think is probably the direction I would go. I mean, I think you've seen, even at Nebraska, I mean, when they've been not good up front or gotten pushed around versus, I mean, even last year or the year before that, they were decent up front. I mean, you can see the difference there. And I wouldn't say Nebraska was, even in the ballpark of elite last year. They were good, but go back to that Ohio State game. They were good, really good up front. And I mean, you were right in that game, right down to the last possession. So I'll go along with your four-man front. I think quarterback play might also be up there for me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
So DB asked the question yesterday, would you rather have dominant offensive line or dominant defensive line if you have to choose one?
Nebraska won in the 80s with O-line. But when it came down to nut cutting time in bowl games, it was always somebody else's D-line that.
Well, and then look at the D-lines on the team that won the national titles, right?
Yeah, but also
offensive lines were great too.
O-line got all the runs.
So Nebraska wasn't really picking and choosing. They kind of had both, right? But
I would say defense. I would rather have it on defense. I would take elite defensive line play and average offensive line play rather than the other way around. Like if you're wanting to like truly win titles.
Bruntz, I'm going to get the basketball here in a second, but let me get one more baseball in deal, because just listening to this conversation, I was going to ask you earlier before Ravi's either or. You still need guys like Broderick and Christo, who we haven't talked about, who I don't think are going to always be midweek options, because they're going to need to be so good on maybe the back end of closing games out, or whatever you want to do with Wordley or some guys like that, where even good starting pitchers these days in baseball they need stoppers at the end of games now. It's almost critical.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's always been true. I mean, like, in thinking back, since Nebraska's been in the Big Ten, I mean, their best teams, they've had guys that are like
Schwellenbach comes in and closes the door, right, or something like that.
Right, and sometimes it's not even a closer. Like Zach Hirsch was really good in certain spots of coming in, and if you can have a guy come in and give you like 2 or 3 good innings of relief, that's a really valuable thing. And I think Nebraska has this year at least a couple guys that I would put in that category. I mean, Worthley certainly is that. I mean, he might even be a multi-time a weekend guy. I think that was the goal with him. Christo certainly. Broderick's going to be just the ninth inning guy. I mean, he's got the kind of stuff where maybe he could be a multi-inning guy too. But in college baseball, I mean, when you get into Saturdays and Sundays, you need those kinds of guys that, if your starter can go 4 or 5 on Sunday, how do you kind of get it over the finish line? And if you have somebody like that, that's huge. So that's always, I think, kind of an overlooked piece of college baseball is it's the depth. And, I wouldn't anticipate like Christo being, like you said, a Tuesday starter. I think they've got other guys that can maybe handle that role, but, consistent bullpen guys that can come in tough spots and get you out. That's
we've seen Drew Burr, right? Like, we know what he does for Indiana. You're gonna see one in Maddox from Oregon. Like, these guys, I don't know. Conference is gonna be, I think, maybe better than we're giving it credit for. Let me get to tonight, Bruntz, because in another referendum game, it seems like they all are, right? Every Nebraska basketball game. where do you put Maryland given what's on the slate here and it being at home tonight?
It's another big one. I mean, it's
how many weeks have I asked you this in a row? 3?
yeah. I think you just probably assume I'm going to say it's important.
It's a pretty big one.
Kind of we're always in agreement. It's like, how does this keep happening?
They're all pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, it's what a win tonight does is it releases the pressure valve a little bit on what's coming down the road. I mean, it's the road schedule gets a little bit more manageable towards the end here, and you get one like this tonight at home, and I think you really kind of start feeling good about things, and it would be, I think, a big confidence win too, just kind of given the challenges of whatever Burke's situation is going to be, and this is a game where you're going to have to kind of dig deep if you're going to win it. So it's big. It's really big. You're kind of at that fun time of year too, where you're checking the net rankings every night. You're seeing the bracketology and everything. I think there's pressure that comes with that, and if you're able to kind of hold court at home and stay on par, that's a big thing, and kind of eases the pressure a bit for you as you get further into the month.
I'd love net rankings a lot more if I didn't have to wait 5 or 6 hours to know if something was going to be quad 1 or quad 2.
Not just 5 or 6 hours. Sometimes
listen,
it's like 5 or 6 weeks.
Listen, Bruntz, Ravi, you guys almost lost me about. Shane, was that about 5 or 6 years ago? 5 maybe. I went on a quads rant.
Oh, you did.
About how dumb it was. And I was like, I'm not going to allow myself to get that worked up again.
Yeah. Well, there's got to be some kind of like premium net thing, right? Like you can pay some money and get those rankings
real time
as they happen. Yeah.
That's why I'm more of a Ken Palm guy myself.
Well, it's like you go to bed or you close
gauge-
your eyes
gauge
and
that ranking.
it's a quad 1 win and you blink a couple of times or wake up in the middle of the night. You're like, damn it. It's a quad 2. That's stupid.
Because somebody in the West Coast Conference lost at home. Bruntz, we appreciate the time as always. DB saved me from asking a question that was probably going to sound too mean to the person involved, not to you. So I'll save the Braxton Mia slander for when you're off the air.
Hey, would you knock it off?
Appreciate the time as always, Bruntz. We'll talk to you later.
Yep, we'll see you.
Thanks, Bruntz.
More Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.
Leave me alone.
I will not.